So yeah, welcome to another Changing Planet seminar hosted by the Grantham Institute at Imperial. Just so you all know, this will be recorded. So if you do have any questions, anybody online as well, please feel free to use the chat, but make sure you put your name and your affiliation so we know who you are. And we'd also love to know where you've joined us from. So today it's my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Hugo Tagholm, who currently heads up the global marine conservation NGO Oceana in the UK and previously led the NGO Surfers Against Sewage, as well as many other initiatives. Today, he'll be talking about his career in ocean activism, campaigning on issues including water quality, plastic pollution, and marine protected areas, and how he has presented campaigns which turn public action into policy change. And I believe you also have written for the Ocean Conservationist? Oceanographic magazine, nice, which is a very cool publication. So yeah, welcome Hugo, and over to you.
Thank you. I'll put this around there. How's that work? Can I put it in my pocket?
Probably
like a collar. Shall I just? Feels weird around my neck. That's okay. It's okay. I can put it. It's sort of like an unusual necklace, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I put it in? Does that still work? Right, okay. Let's do that. And this is a clicker here. This is a... Well, hello everyone. This is quite cozy and intimate. Thank you all for coming along today. Hopefully I can share a few stories and pearls of wisdom. I'm going to talk about my time at Surfers Against Sewage, particularly working on water quality and plastic pollution. I'm going to talk about a little bit about surfing. Have we got any surfers in the room? A few. Any swimmers? A few. Anyone who likes the ocean? Everyone. Never been a prerequisite of any job I've done to be either a swimmer or a surfer. It's just sort of pretty convenient. It was what took me into working for Surfers Against Sewage, which I did back in 2008 is when I took over. I previously, before working at SAS, I'm a Londoner born and bred. I'm from Camden and Islington, really. And I worked for a long time in the center of London, in PR companies, and I was Gordon Brown's wife for a long time in an Belgian charity, which is now called Their World. So my whole career has really been about either messaging on good issues or working, hopefully, on good issues for young people and for the environment. And Surfers Against Sewage is certainly sort of a combination of those things. I am a surfer for my sins. I'm not a very good surfer, but it is what I do. I've already chalked up surfs this year so far. I've got a target of 50. I'm hopefully going to get there. It's what actually drives me. I think it's really important that we focus on that work-life balance in what we're doing. And I find that it's that can be motivated for my day-to-day work. And well-being is such an important thing. I don't think you can be your best, whether you're studying or whether you're working, unless you're really topping up your batteries in the thing. I'm lucky to work in things I love to. I sort of talk about the things I love every day, work around people I really admire. That can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes you never stop. So complicated. But I spent about 15 years with SAS, from the sort of beachfront. That photo before was taken in Cornwall. I'm down at the Hale River mouth, a couple of years, right to the front benches of Parliament. This was an action we did. They're unsurprisingly on the plastic pollution crisis. All of those bottles were collected by some of tears we mobilised around the coastline back in 2017, 2018. And I've got to talk, and it's sort of a great privilege to be able to talk about these issues to you and to people around the country and around the world and in the media, and try and position them effectively. And SAS and the ocean actually is a really powerful thing when it comes down to positioning some of these big environmental challenges, climate change, pollution, those things which otherwise can be quite dry. But if you find the right combination of a environment, something that people truly love, it can propel it onto the headlines. And nothing was better than surfing and beaches. I mean, we're an island nation. Everyone has a memory of somewhere, somehow, a weekend in Brighton, a week in Cornwall, surfing somewhere with their parents, with their friends, with a partner, whatever it may be. So it's a very powerful thing in this country. So I got to talk a lot about plastic pollution, and that was a sort of big crisis in sort of 2017, 2018, which I'm going to talk about more. Of course, at the moment, and particularly today, some of you might have been tracking the stuff that's happening in Cardiff today with the River Action Group, who are taking the government to court on the failure to protect the River Wye. And it took me to unusual places too. I worked with amazing surfers, world champions, amazing swimmers, Olympians, sailors, but also strike up a really strong relationship with the royal family. I particularly worked with Prince Charles, now our king, of course, Prince Harry a bit. I got to go to that amazing wedding in May, that sunny May day when Prince Harry got married, and I did a lot with our king, which was interesting. And like, I was never really a royalist. I'm sure not you are, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. But ultimately, it opened a lot of doors, and he's truly passionate about the things that I cared about: plastic pollution. He's been talking about for decades, the environment, sustainable farming, climate change, all of these things. So it's pretty important. And from time to time, I put on a suit as well as a wetsuit. So I sometimes have to do that thing. But it was always about the waves for me and about the ocean. It's what one of my first was really the and then sport and surfing. And this is a beach called Porthowan in Cornwall, not far from where I live. Really with the area of where SAS started, one of the founding, as it were, areas for SAS. A place that was called Port Tampon back in the 1980s and 90s, because there was so much sanitary waste on the beach. And it's interesting to see how some of these issues and pollution, and then also fall away again. And we see how good policy, good enforcement of that policy, and good implementation actually happens for a period of time, and then often can recede. And so we never truly have saved the environment or one issue. We always have to keep pushing and make sure that we maintain and safeguard our wins, because if not, we go backwards. And we've seen that really strikingly on the water quality debate. So I'm going to talk about sewage and activism, and I'll actually whisk you straight back to 1880 and London, which was a big moment for public disgust, public outrage, politicians and policymakers acting on a solution being implemented. So back then, the River Thames was riddled with pollution. Thankfully, I wasn't alive then, almost. It was filled with industrial effluent, sewage, sort of animal waste, all sorts of things. And it literally stank. I understand the reason for the long process that parliamentarians have is because of the Great Stink of London. It stank so badly during the summertime that they had to leave Parliament. They tried all sorts of things, special net curtains with to try and shield them from this stink, but it was so bad that they had to leave Parliament for an extended period of time. And they still have that, even though the Thames stinks less badly these days. And this was causing sickness and illness amongst the population of London. It was causing real outrage, and it led to action in Parliament. You know, some of the sort of cartoons from the time, this reminds me of some of the stuff with plastic pollution now. The sort of the microscopic particles we see, the microplastics, the nanoplastics we see in water samples, whether it's river water or seawater. And this was the sort of the toxic soup of the time from the River Thames. And so that issue forced parliamentarians to act, and they employed Joseph Bazalgette to build the Victorian sewer network, which I've been down. I actually went down in central London a couple of years ago, morning. Got lowered down. I had all of the safety gear on, lowered down into the sort of the centre sort of sewer. I was actually with a Conservative politician and a Daily Mail journalist, so it's quite a weird Monday morning, being down the sewers with them. And all of that Victorian brickwork stands and functions to this day. Actually, it almost worked stations. It almost worked better than the new stuff that they've built. So it's really interesting. Look, so fast forward a couple of hundred years. The sewage issue came back in the sort of, you know, the 80s, set up in 1990 originally, and really in line with European legislation that was coming in the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, the Water Framework Directive. There was lots to act on. It was really bureaucrats in Brussels and politicians in Brussels who were writing amazing bits of policy and legislation that was then enacted in the UK as the water industry was privatized. And so there's a big decade of action in the 90s. There was some improvement, some investment, never enough, and the water industry didn't keep pace with it. And when I took over in 2008, SAS knew already that there was a big problem with sewage in our rivers, in our seas, right around our coastline. But it wasn't in the public domain like that. It's almost a headline story every scene. You barely have to look at the sea and somebody's had an experience of being ill in the sea. That comes up. So we started to bring it back up into public consciousness with various techniques. It was really important to reset the issue in people's mind because they really didn't get it. And this is really one of the early photos I did when I first took over. It's a guy called Jack. He's a very, very good surfer, probably one of the best in the country. Surfs incredibly big waves, very and all round. Actually, a very good photographer now, and is featured on the front of some of the best scenes in the world in terms of his own photography, not him personally. And I invited him. I said, "Look, Jack, can you come along and do a shoot with us because we've got an issue we want to break?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, SAS, I'm going to come and do a shoot with you. It's cool. I'm going to be cool." I was like, "Yeah, you're going to be cool." And then I had the two makeup artists put him in a suit, and they were applying the glue, and I think you can just about see the hatred for me in his eye there, and he's glaring directly at me. And I don't think we've ever quite got over that. He will take my son surfing from time to time, but yeah, Jack did us a great favor. But people were very dismissive of this. I said, look, there isn't that much sewage going out into the sea. There's not that much sewage going out into our rivers. What are you about? But we knew there was, because we were tracking already combined sewer overflows. And this is a combined sewer overflow in Cornwall. It's on the Red River. The Red River flows directly down into, if any of you know Godrevy, Park St. Ives, one of the most popular beaches in the southwest. It's a place that children come to play, families come on holiday, people go surfing year round, and that flows directly into the river, that flows directly into the sea where people are swimming. And all of that is sanitary waste, which is just, of course, of a big sewage discharge from that pipe. And there are hundreds of these around, thousands of these around the coastline, and thousands of these on our rivers, which are meant to only be used in emergency circumstances, but are actually used almost on a daily basis as a regular means of discharging sewage into our. And that's not because it should be that way. It's because the water companies have failed to invest adequately in sewage infrastructure with capacity, with treatment, with nature-based solutions. They just treat it because it's the cheapest way for them to maintain those billions of pounds worth of profit that they make. And that sort of washed for a while with the public. It was hidden upstream. It was hidden broadly out, but that CSO is really hard to find. Cover balls, you have to fight your way through undergrowth to keep it that way. Look, overflows are like that. But actually, surfers were some of the first to start exposing this, but then also swimmers. And I'm sure some of you have been wild swimming in our rivers and, of course, and particularly the boom in wild swimming around the pandemic has started to bring public attention much more. People are using their coastline. People are falling in love with our blue spaces in a much, much bigger way. And so this has been part of the exposing of water companies, along with data that we pioneered. Now, SAS, we pioneered a thing called the Safer Seas and River Service, which is real-time information, real-time alerts on those combined sewer overflows. We started at the beach I showed you before, Port Powan, formerly known as Port Tampon. It has 2 combined sewer overflows going into it. And we had access to data, telemetry from those pipes, from the water company that triggered. At the beginning, it was just a thing. I had somebody sat in the office going, and it feels like, let's put the alert out. Subscribers, and we had like 5 subscribers. And then we started building it out. And over the years, we built it into about 400 different locations around the coast, and most of the popular beaches. And we got tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And not only could they get that data to inform them of how, when, and where to get in the water, they could avoid a pollution event. They could make a decision not to go to one beach, go to a different beach, protect their own health. It's not always a hugely elevated risk, but sewage carries all sorts of different pathogens that you don't want to be exposed to, and they can make you mildly very, very sick, and you've got to be careful about them. So there are places that I'll definitely avoid. Places that I might surf, but fun not to surf, particularly on a good day when he might take the waves from me. I'll never do that. And this has been really important, not only to keep people safe and track that data. We started building a repository of sort of a health database of people who'd got sick, where that was, type of sickness it was, so they can enter all of that through this. But then also enable them to, every time there was a spill, email their local MP or message their local water company CEO to tell them what's happening, not only on that day, but the history of spills at that spot. So a really powerful citizen lobbying tool. We also started collecting data with the European Centre for the Environment and Human Health, the experts. We were never experts. We just had a big audience that we could communicate with. So we collaborated with the ECHH. And one study was particularly powerful on antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Surfers, swimmers are 3 times as likely, or have 3 times the level of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in their stomachs as the background population. And that, of course, could be from the water. They're surfing at the mouths of rivers. Antibiotics are coming down through the sewer system. They're coming out of our farming system. And so this is a really big issue because, as you'll all know, antibiotic resistance is one of the big global threats alongside climate change, alongside terrorism, all sorts of, but it's high up there in global risks. We took to the beaches around the country. You know, this sort of action, as my first sort of, I said, the media attention. Back in the 90s when SAS started, it was really, really powerful, but it remains very powerful. The sort of iconic image of surfers with surfboards, gas masks, standing up to really one issue, the right to surf in clean water or be in clean water. That was actually on Brighton Beach. You'll probably recognize the old pier there. It was one of the most dangerous stunts we ever did. It was blowing about 100 miles an hour that day. Everyone's gripping onto their boards with their lives. I'm actually up at the far end there. It was a big day. And that came in line with our annual water quality report that sets out all of the stats, the water quality at our beaches, the number of spills. So all the data, all of that health data, the engagement with the public, giving them actions to do, was what made it into a big policy issue. It also became that through the Environment Act, and a specific part of that was voted down that would have held water companies to account. And all of that together has helped make water quality the issue it is today. Always on the front of the papers, Fergal Sharkey making a lot of noise about it, lots of people talking about water quality every day, and now an election issue, almost as much a political issue as it is an environmental issue. People are also outraged by the financial part of it that water companies have made, about 60 billion in dividends since privatization, and yet they're treating our rivers and our coastline as a dumping ground. So, few and one, proud that we were able to get to the top of the agenda. But going to be a lot of change. But contrary to a lot of public belief, there is not a switch that can just be turned to stop sewage. It will be a 20 or 30-year plan to incrementally bring down that level of sewage pollution. So there's no magic wand, and a lot of these big issues, there never is a magic wand. So you've got to make sure you take people from the campaigning, which is getting it into the headlines, and get people enraged, motivated, active about an issue, into the solutions, which is much more about getting people around the table and starting to deliver the solutions and create the solutions together. And we saw that in 2017, 2018 as well on plastic pollution. And there are a few tipping points in my time at Surfers Against Sewage which really stand out for me. We've been working on it since the start of my time there, 2008. We had a handful of volunteers, a handful of actions that people could take with us. But it was hard to get into the papers. It was not sexy. It was not something people really wanted to engage with. There were a few sort of fringe journalists who were starting to take an interest, but it was a once in a while sort of story that would run with it. And then there were 2 tipping points I'm going to talk about. One was 2014, I think it was 2013-14 Storm Hercules, which was a massive. We're having more and more of these now, but back then it was less frequent. Storm Hercules blew in from the west. You can see black sort of circle, the black stain in the middle of the most powerful winds, and it drove huge waves, huge winds into the coastline of Ireland and the south, particularly, and with it brought a tidal wave of plastic pollution too. This was one of my favorite beaches. This actually isn't the worst of the images, but I took team down there that lunchtime, and they collected thousands of plastic bottles. They focused on plastic bottles that day, thousands just in that afternoon alone. And it was knee deep in some places with plastic, polystyrene, food wrappers, plastic bottles, fishing nets, all sorts of things. And that storm not only created a huge mess on the coastline, but it awoke a lot of people. Saw new NGOs setting themselves up. We saw beach clean groups setting themselves up after that. It really created outrage. And some big moment like that is necessary to create the solution. And then Blue Planet, who watched Blue Planet 2? You all seen it? I mean, pretty amazing, amazing program. And I had the good fortune of doing a talk with one of the producers, a guy called James Honeyborn, a few years ago, and he was talking, and all of the fascinating things in the Blue Planet, fish behaviors and new species that they had found, and new things that they had observed in film. But what stood out most was out of all of that, I think it was 7 hours of broadcasting, just 14 minutes dedicated to plastic. And it's amazing that it seems in many people's mind that it was a documentary about plastic, but it was not. It was about the ocean and the amazing life in our ocean. But that 14 minutes stuck out. It stuck with people to the heart of homes around the country and around the world. It shows you that a powerful, bit of communication at the right time, landed in the right place, can really change hearts and minds. Change the way government. It changed the way the media started to want to cover the story. It changed the number to be on the sleeper train to come up to Parliament. It changed lots of things like really quickly. So good communication at the right time to the right audience is so powerful and important in policy change. We went from a few hundred volunteers back in 2008 when I started, and we were building already to a few tens of thousands. But when I left SAS, we had created a community of about 300,000 people taking action every year through beach cleans and plastics actions with us. See if this runs. This was a film.
We live in a dangerous time. A new superpower is rising in the Pacific. A country 5 times larger than North Korea is amassing the greatest chemical threat ever known. Yet its aggressive expansion is being ignored. Governments refuse sanctions, and leading corporations continue to profit from it. The battle for the Pacific has already been lost. This is just the start. Expanding its borders with the plastics we throw away threatens the entire planet. This is wasteland.
Another bit of hyperbole, really, in many ways. And we, again, got a bit of criticism about that because, of course, there's not an actual country or an actual island you can stand on in any of our oceans or seas. But we had created that in line with a new campaign at the time. called plastic-free communities. And we had sort of devised this before the Blue Planet had come out. We'd been working on the beach cleans. And we, of course, realized that not everyone is by the beach. Not everyone can take that action. Not everyone necessarily wants to even be on the beach or pick up stuff. They're like, my waste, it's not my litter, not the sort of thing I like to do. So we wanted to be much more inclusive, think about communities around the country. I was sort of inspired by the Fair Trade Town accreditation and different sort of carbon projects to reduce carbon. And we realized there was nothing in the plastic space for people to come together to reduce single-use plastic. So we created this thing called plastic-free communities, sort of a 5-step plan to reduce any location plastic pollution. Question? And we thought we launched it just before the Blue Planet came out, and we had an ambition of I think 100 communities by 2020. We wanted to be involved. By 2020, we had eclipsed that sort of 5 times. I think we were at 1,500 communities by the time I left SS. And the really important thing about it was it brought together local government, local businesses, local people, schools, other NGOs to collaborate on reducing plastic pollution. It was also like a gateway for people to take wider action on climate and other issues in the area. And this remains very successful. And of course, this is an issue that keeps moving. It's for a global plastics future. A good outcome from all of that uprising in 2017, 2018, 2019. But the science keeps becoming more shocking. Plastic in our blood, plastic in our water, plastic in our, in our bodies in sort of every part of our, on the highest mountains, in the deepest sea. So this is a problem that hasn't been fixed yet. I'm very pleased there's a global treaty on its way. It's actually very ambitious. I'm pleased with some of the things we helped deliver in this country, the plastic bag charge, the plastics tax, certain plastics bans, hopefully a deposit soon is something like long and hard, still not implemented, government very slow, environmental things, but we keep moving. And now in my new role, there are issues. I'm working on oil and gas. I'm in the transition away from oil and gas, trying to stop new oil and gas in the North Sea and support the just transition to cleaner, greener energy in a nature and ocean positive way. Of course, putting more North Sea oil and gas in completely blows a hole not only in our climate commitments, the Paris Agreement in this country, but also our biodiversity commitments. We recently announced new leases directly in marine protected areas, of course, contravening everything that a marine protected area should be. We built a great alliance around that, the Ocean Alliance Against Offshore Drilling, some of the biggest NGOs in the country, Greenpeace and Blue Marine Foundation, Dolphin Conservation Society, surfers, swimmers, all sorts of people represented within that, and fighting those oil fields, not based on the climate concerns, but on the biodiversity and marine concerns and the coastal community concerns. Industrial fishing, you'd be shocked to know that this also takes place in our marine protected areas. Last year alone, there was about 140,000 hours of industrial fishing in our marine protected areas, about 10,000 hours of bottom trawling and dredging, the most damaging type of fishing. That's something we're working hard on. Last week we had 2 big wins, 13 new MPA with huge targeted restrictions on bottom trawling and dredging, thanks to Oceana and our allies. That protects another sort of 4,000 square kilometers of seabed. Small in the big scheme of things, but also very important and sends out a strong message of what should happen in MPAs. We also help contribute to the ban on sand eel fishing. Now that may seem a bit boring, but it's actually those tiny silver fish are the basis of the food chain that supports so many organisms. So whales and dolphins, puffins, porpoises, animals that we love, and they are the forage fish, the food of those species. So we're not against fishing, but we are against the fishing in the wrong place, and particularly against the industrialization of it. And often big industry hides behind the people or the smaller people. So big fishing, the one the most damage, often dresses itself up as the little guy or the little girl who is sailing out in a boat every day and catching a few fish sustainably, and they love to do that. The water industry does the same. Lots of industries do this thing. Farming particularly does it. Farming is a massively industrialized industry, but they like to hide behind the little red tractor and the little person poodling out into the field. So we're fighting to end overfishing. It's not just it's a sort of a political decision at the moment every year. There's lots of complexities around it with our trade and cooperation agreement, Brexit, with the Fisheries Act, but we keep fighting on that. And there's a lot of hope. So a lot of the stuff at the moment I feel is dressed up in doom and gloom. And I don't know how you feel, but it's quite like a depressing thing and can be pretty bad. But I think we should look to where we have succeeded. And how did we do that? How did we come together as a nation, as people? How did we affect change? And there's some good examples. The ozone layer in the 1980s. This was my childhood. This was one of the big issues. We're all gonna perish because the ozone layer going. And big international agreements came together to outlaw the CFCs and other gases that were driving that. And this is on the way to recovery. The 1984 whale moratorium, again, we saw a lot of whale species and populations on the brink of collapse. That pretty well enforced. Of course, there are some infractions from a couple of countries. Pretty well enforced international agreement has let some of those populations bounce right back and become healthy. Of course, they're under different pressures from climate and plastic and things, but they've come back from the brink in some cases, which is a great success story, and we should look to that. Marine protected area. This is a photo from Mexico and one of their Cabo Pulmo, one of their famous MPAs, which was depleted of life for a long time. And then they brought in a complete ban on fishing for a period of time, and it bounced back and recovered very, very quickly with a number of years. So it proves what we can do with strong enforcement. And it also, just to finish, we all came through the pandemic, and it was something that touched us in a severe way. It was a challenging time, a tragic time, but it showed how quickly governments can act to create legislation, pass legislation, mobilize record amounts of funds, and bring down barriers to create solutions. We saw vaccines being created within a matter of months that normally would have taken a decade or more to deliver to society. We saw them find money that previously they said they did not have to make things happen. And we saw them pass laws overnight to control all of us. I'm sure if I had said to you the February before it broke that you weren't going to be able to see each other or go to the pub or see your friends or go out, you would have laughed in my face and said that will never happen. No one will ever comply. But we all complied in the face of what we were being told with that communication. So governments have proved that they can do it, they can come together, and we can move quickly, and they're going to need to do the same on the environment. And there'll probably be some cliff edges when they're going to have to act like that with much big events particularly from a climate impact. So I'm going to stop there and take any questions you may have. There we go.
And does anybody have any questions? Thank you for that amazing talk. That was great.
Okay.
Thank you. That was really interesting. You showed a picture of the storm. I was wondering whether you think it's possible to disentangle the different contributions of increasing weather extremes, sort of enhanced storminess that's happening as a contributing factor to plastic pollution, as well as whether it's possible to disentangle that from the role of increasing plastic waste production. What do you think the difference? How much they contribute?
Good question. Look, I don't think irrespective, the increasing regularity and intensity of those storms isn't the driver of plastic pollution. I don't think anyone should be. I think we shouldn't be getting fixated too much on the pickup of plastic pollution anyway. So we know there's too much already. All of the global surveys show that. We've just seen Break Free from Plastic. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, do an annual global brand audit, which always returns. Coca-Cola is always number one. Mondelez, who's got the chocolate bars, Pepsi Cola, McDonald's is often up there. So we know the sort of culprits, the big multinationals. It's unsurprising they produce the most stuff. So like, whilst you could disentangle that, I think the evidence and all of the root from any disentangle lead back to the same place, which is big corporations have to reduce the amount of plastic that they're creating. And where they do create plastic, they need to try and deliver the systems for circularity. And not to bridge too far away from your question, but lots of people, I hear lots of, I mean, I'm quite old, but lots of older people than me go, oh, young people just, you know, my age, it was not like this. You know, young people knew what to do and they'd put everything in the bin and it was like all perfect. And it's like, well, not really, because there just wasn't all of the products 50 years ago. There wasn't fast food restaurants on every corner. There wasn't a throwaway culture like we have today. And the systems were designed to deal with the waste of the time. Our systems haven't kept pace with the products that are being created today. So it's very difficult to know where all of this stuff goes. So we could disentangle it. And I'm sure that there is it's more like spikes of plastic being dumped on our beaches after those storms. So it's more intense at times, and that may be offset with, between those times, less plastic being released. But it would be a good study for somebody to do, and I'd like to see that disentanglement. So if you're going to take it up, let me know. Yeah.
Do you have any examples of any companies that have made good positive changes towards reducing their plastic? Do you have any examples of where Coca-Cola have said, right, we're going to now try and design in a different, are there any examples?
Yeah, look, I think lots of companies are starting to say the right things and do some of the right things. And you know, Coca-Cola themselves would state that they're a proponent of deposit returns. I want them to happen here, for example. You know, whether that actually translates into them using their full force to make it happen is another question. You know, we see lots of small companies trying to create true circularity and to reduce their sort of use of virgin plastics. You know, companies like Patagonia, you know, Finisterre in the sort of action sports space, and more and more companies are putting recycled content into their products. The challenge is a system that can really capture their recycled products. There aren't systems. I mean, I think we all know, if you look around society, whether it's in this building or in the streets, there just isn't this infrastructure to deal with the amount of plastic that we have in society at the moment. So I think that's what people to focus, because if we create the right sort of material flow, I think it will find its way always back into more and more products, and there are more companies wanting it. So.
Very much for the talk.
Pleasure.
More about sewage at the beginning. It's reminded me, you must think around Christmas New Year's panorama investigation in the Northwest, and they were saying the private water companies are potentially doing dodgy stuff or reporting it properly.
Yeah.
Then the government environment agency is really looking into everything.
Yeah.
I just wonder where you think the solution is. That should it be from the private companies or more from the government, or is it just a totally broken system, really?
Very good question. Big question. Look, I think it's been broken for a long time. The water companies have been able to mark their own homework for many years. You know, self-reporting on their sort of sewage bills, and it hasn't worked. The environmental regulator, the Environment Agency, were also drastically defunded, particularly sort of about 10 years ago, 2014. It was actually Liz Truss who did that, sort of eviscerated their budget. And of course, if the Environment Agency, the regulator, don't have the funds to do their job, they're never going to hold the water companies to account. I would say personally, and I think this is in the public domain, that the water industry is an example of regulatory capture. And there's like a revolving door between government departments, the water industry, and the regulator, and you find people circulating between these places. And it was actually exposed in the press last week, a big dinner with the regulator to try and work out how they were going to respond to the sewage scandal. And it was in a lavish venue. very expensive food and bottles of wine. And I think this is the type of thing that does happen. It's not just in industry, it's in the fishing industry, this sort of regulatory capture where people just move between regulated government and that industry, and it stops sort of progress and holds the sort of status quo. And I think the water industry is one of the biggest examples in the world, and we're one of the only, I think, countries in the world that has a fully privatized water sector. And I personally, I don't think it can happen now, but I think it should be renationalized at some stage, because I think it's, you know, this is not for people to make a huge profit, and people are in very elaborate sort of offshore schemes making far too much money out of the water, which is one of the two essential fluids of life alongside air.
I was just wondering, at any of your events or demonstrations, do you have a lot of conversations with the general public, and how informed do you think they are, or like?
It's a really good question. I mean, I speak to the general public all the time. I mean, I like that more than speaking to politicians, if I'm honest. Just people like us, you know, people who are using the environment and being out. I'm not sure they're always that informed, but I'm not sure social media is very helpful for us all in being informed about things. We're all used to, it's like 15-second videos. It's like, it's got to be like a yes or no quick answer. It's got to be, is it right or is it wrong? There's not much space for nuance, and all of these big issues are very nuanced, and there's lots of trade-offs. And it's not just a binary thing, sewage or no sewage in our sea, plastic or no plastic, or no fishing. It's always much more complicated than that. And I think that very nuanced argument, and we saw it, you know, particularly being you know, devastating when it came down to Brexit. And look, I'm sorry, I'm going to show my sort of colours around it, but you know, Brexit was translated into this sort of very binary. It's just a binary referendum, and it was on a really, really complicated thing that had so many nuances to it, and the public rightfully couldn't understand all of that. I don't understand all of it, but we pay really intelligent people to do that stuff and understand parts of it, and there's one person who understands all. And so I think it's really important to recognize on some of these big issues that we need the expert to be expert, and we need to trust the experts, and we vote for some of those people through our, you know, democratic systems, but we also should recognize that people like yourself and educate themselves for a long time to get to be an expert. And it's important that we can rely on that and come to a new era where that is accepted and celebrated rather than dismissed, because there's a lot in social media and in the sort of toxic digital world that dismisses that and is anti-expert, anti sort of, you know, sort of professionalism and anti-nuance. And all of this is nuance, and it is complicated, even on the sewage debate. I'll tell you what's going to happen next is, like, there's going to be the solutions, and some of those communities that have been railing against, you know, 5-10 spills at their local beach and the impacts on their swimming, the water company will say, right, we're going to come in and we need to dig up all of this part and build a big holding tank. And then the village will go, we don't want that. We're going to form a campaign against the holding tank because it's bad on pouring concrete and climate, bad on the space we've got, it's bad on the traffic, it's bad on our kids. And so that will happen next. And so there's always much more nuance to these things. And I think we should all be aware.
I was wondering if you've observed any difference in the way your non-plastic campaign has been received by the public and politicians compared to your plastic campaign. And the reason I'm asking, I guess, is in my experience, and I'm an photographer, I work on solution before I work on an aspect of solution. People are super interested when you talk about plastic because it's so tangible and so good for their everyday life is. It's unsurprising that, not surprising that they relate so much to the plastic campaign. Which is fantastic, but also kind of throws a shadow on everything else oceanography, marine, everything. So I was wondering what your experience is.
Look, I think on the plastics is about sort of sort of unpack that, I think it was like, because as you say, it's so tangible. What people were seeing on the beachfront, some of the the image I showed is the same that people see in their everyday lives. It's almost like the same as their fast food restaurant table, or the city. It's like really understandable. I mean, plastics in its own right, it's like quite a boring topic. I mean, it's like, who wants it? Like, it's all about material science. It's all about systems engineering to control it. I mean, no one really wants to talk about that. What they wanted to talk about was, the position between that, multicolored plastic tide line and the beautiful ocean that they see. And so I think it was a very powerful thing to take forward. And of course, politicians start to listen most of all when you've got a big constituency of people, if you've got a really good cohort of experts or organizations behind you. So it can be sort of one of the two things. But that constituency of people in plastic pollution was big. It reached a point that each and every country, as they do, particularly on the coastline now, on sewage pollution, felt that it was a threat to their own seat and their own electability. And when you get to that point, it's quite interesting, because then they have to start paying attention. I will sort of add a word of caution, and I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but I think it's worth sharing with you, that I'm very used to in my career the long arm of the establishment coming around the shoulder and saying, come in and have a nice cup in the House of Lords or the Houses of Parliament. Come into Downing Street. We'll have a chat with you about the thing you want to chat about. And that happens. And at the beginning, when you're in your early part of your career, you're really fat. You're like, I'm pretty influential. I can go to this place and I can create change. But it's a trick. And they trick you, and they get your friendship and allyship, and they make you feel special with that thing. But they don't actually. And they just go, right, we've ticked that one. We've got SAS there, or Oceana there, or Hugo there, or whoever you are. And it's one to really bear in mind as you're starting to reach out in your careers. It's like the establishment wants to neutralize people. I mean, I don't say that in a conspiracy theorist sort of way. I don't think there's a big Illuminati around the world. I don't think there's some. I mean, they can't even organize the things that they're meant to organize. They can't organize themselves in a secret sort of club. That's just not happening. There's no conspiracy theory, but always be aware of it when you're talking to people, that they sort of have to talk to everyone, and they need to say they have to. And so there is a thing you've got to be careful of, and don't be afraid to ask, and be bold and chase on what you need. And that's what we did on all of the sort of big plastics campaigns, particularly on deposit returns, which still hasn't been delivered, but it's still something that I talk to people around all the time, and it is coming. So I hope I answered part of your question.
I mean, this is super interesting, but I guess it was more, you said that the plastic-free communities get a goal of 100 and you managed to get 5 times that in a really short period.
Do you know what was really interesting about that? Plastic-free communities, there's like, we set up a framework, and then people took it, and it was sort of a license to start organizing in their local area. But then they went way beyond it, and it grew organically in its own way. And they were all doing other things beyond what was set for them. And they started to move it into different local campaigns, some nationally, and setting up sometimes as their own sort of charities as part of it too. So it's quite a good way to propel people. And I quite like an open way of doing things, of just giving people the tools to act and then them acting.
See any
Look, I think it's a really good question, particularly as we approach a general election. The general election has to happen the 28th, next latest. And the reason I say that is because this is still often the preserve of the people who can afford to care. We're in a cost of living crisis. And I always sort of aim to make it as accessible as possible, but still, a lot of environmentalism is not on people's day-to-day sort of at the forefront of their minds, because they're dealing with putting food on the table, working 2 jobs, looking after their kids, all of those things. So there is a real sort of class issue in terms of being able to engage people. But the way we design projects to be as inclusive as possible. We've got into lots of schools we sort of had a plastic-free schools. And and so trying to speak to as many people as possible and take as many people on the journey by lowering barriers. But there is a genuine thing there, and it's difficult to deal with at times. I will say that my personal focus is, I believe, as I said in my last slide on the pandemic, I believe the sort of big levers for change are with government. And like, I have a question mark over community movement building now, even if we see XR and, you know, the really passionate, radical environmentalists, you know, have they stopped Rishi Sunak issuing more licenses for North Sea oil and gas? Have they kept us to the climate commitments? You know, what is the efficacy of building big movements? When 1 million people took the streets to try and stop the Iraq war, did the government listen? So there's a question mark of, like, actually, how do we focus? Do we need numbers, or do we need a different combination of things to really pull those levers in government? Because I think we need a radical shift in the next election. I would urge, will probably be a Labour government, to be much more bold and radical on their policies. No one wants broadly the same as what we've got at the moment. I think I sort of partially answered it, both of you.
Wondering, like other European countries in terms of stuff, like issues around sewage and plastic.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I think a lot of countries are going through the same challenges. So is similar in some European countries. You know, they've got a better track record on the protection of their rivers in much of Europe. And while we've got like 2 bathing waters on our rivers here, there's hundreds across Europe. They're considered, you know, like the coastlines sort of here. Sharing information, and we collaborate all the time with people around the world. We've got actually with Oceana, we've got an amazing office in Brussels and in Madrid, and we work across Europe. And so sharing that intel is really important. Sharing the ways to do things and tactics within campaigning is really important. To try and do things differently too, you know, between countries, and see what could work. I think sometimes we can default into, you know, what is a sort of a, you know, almost a cliched sort of, you know, stereotype of an environmentalist. And I always try and think outside of the box. And maybe some of my slides sort of show that. You know, we've got to try and be a bit different. And so, like, look to the commercial sector, look to the business sector for how they do things. But sharing, I think, is really the sort of central, you know, part of your question, which is, of course, we should always try and share tactics and where things are successful or not. And my last slides were sort of doing that on an international level. It's like, what's worked, and how did that work, and how was it boldly enforced across the world? And I think, you know, a really good example of that. So we should always look for best practice, and look back to see where we can do better. And plastic's a good example of it too. You know, deposit returns are something, again, I'm old enough to remember it actually being a thing, and taking lemonade bottles back to the shops when I was a bit small. I like that question. Because there's a big thing of people dismissing recycling at the moment. Of like, you know, we've of course got to try and have reuse systems. But I don't think, from what I see, there's a world at the moment that's realistic without managing those resources better and recycling them better. The challenge at the moment is our recycling systems don't work effectively enough, and don't return the quality of recycling that is needed for a lot of products. So at the moment, it's not working, and some may argue it's contributing to the problem, because it sort of lulls. My wife does it. She just puts anything into the recycling, but sort of pollute it, basically. And so at the moment, I think it's problematic, but I don't think it's not part of the solution in the long term, because I'm not sure how we can move at the pace that we're moving as society with a fully sort of fill and reuse sort of model. So we have to look at a combination of things, but it needs to be reformed drastically. I mean, it's just not working. If we can't, probably been about 10 years since I started campaigning on deposit returns, and that's economically proven. It lowers carbon emissions, it creates green jobs, and the government still can't implement it. You're like, what evidence do they need to do it better? Why won't they do it? Normally it's about pressure from industry again. So I think recycling is really important, but not working at the moment. But we've got to have more refill, reuse, less packaging, all of that stuff in the sort of hierarchy, in the waste hierarchy. Is that okay? One more. Yeah, look, that's a sort of a educated guess. I haven't modeled that myself on, the complexity of the system. We've still got a combined system, which means the sewage that comes rainwater. Different place. I think 20 to 25 years, maybe longer, to deal with the sort of worst of it. It's a bit like painting the fourth grid. Who knows, in 20 to 25 years, when they finish that investment plan, there'll be another pesky campaigner going, it's not, you've got to, there's this problem now from it. So, but that's just a continual growth in society. But yeah, it's going to take a long time. It's not going to, the challenge electorally is the Labour Party of now sort of putting a lot of, they're going to inherit it and they're not going to be able to fix think that they should be able to fix it. So we'll see what happens.